Okay, let's go. Number 1. The Tomb of Tamerlane. The year is 1941. You are standing in the Gur-e-Amir Mausoleum in Samarkand, watching Soviet archaeologists prepare to open the most dangerous sealed tomb in Central Asia. The stone sarcophagus before you belonged to Timur, known to history as Tamerlane, the 14th century conqueror who built an empire stretching from the Persian Gulf to the gates of China. His armies are estimated to have killed 17 million people, 5% of the entire world population at the time. For 5 centuries, the tomb has remained sealed. For 5 centuries, the local Uzbek elders have been delivering the same warning to anyone who would listen. Open this tomb, and the greatest war the world has ever seen will begin. The warnings were recorded. They were not hearsay. 2 inscriptions had been found within the burial complex over preceding generations. The first read in Arabic, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." The second was carved directly inside the casket itself and would not be found until the moment of opening. The Uzbek elders carried the tradition further. In the weeks before the excavation began, they traveled to meet NKVD officials and stated, directly and on record, that the tomb must not be opened, that the timing June 1941 was especially dangerous. The officials thanked them and continued. Soviet anthropologist Mikhail Gerasimov led the team. He was not superstitious. He was the finest forensic facial reconstructionist in the USSR, the man who had rebuilt the faces of Ivan the Terrible and Alexander Nevsky from skulls alone. He had spent his career among the dead and had never been harmed by them. On June 19, 1941, the sarcophagus was opened. Inside the casket, engraved in the stone beneath Tamerlane's bones, the team found the second inscription. "Whoever disturbs my tomb will release an invader more terrible than I." Gerasimov photographed it, measured it, and continued with the analysis. 3 days later, on June 22, 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa. 3 million soldiers crossed into the Soviet Union along a front stretching 2,900 kilometers. It was the largest military invasion in human history. Within 4 years, 30 million Soviet citizens would be dead. The rational explanation covers this entirely. Operation Barbarossa had been planned and signed since December 1940, 6 months before Gerasimov's team touched the sarcophagus. Hitler had issued the directive. The troop buildups had been observed. The invasion had nothing to do with a medieval conqueror's bones. The 3-day gap between the opening and the invasion was not a connection. It was a coincidence of the kind that accumulates whenever a date and an event are placed close enough together. But the story does not end in June. In November 1942, under circumstances that combined scientific reassessment and a degree of political pressure from Uzbek and Muslim officials, Stalin ordered Tamerlane's remains returned to Samarkand and reinterred with full Islamic funeral rites, precisely as the elders had demanded from the beginning. The ceremony was conducted on November 19th and 20th, 1942. On November 19th, 1942, the Soviet counteroffensive at Stalingrad began. Operation Uranus, the operation that would encircle the German Sixth Army and turn the entire course of the war, launched on the same day Tamerlane's bones were placed back in the earth. Within 3 months, the largest army Germany had ever fielded in a single theater surrendered in the ruins of Stalingrad. The trajectory of the war reversed. It did not reverse gradually. It reversed within weeks of the resealing. Gerasimov's scientific findings, for the record, were meticulous and valuable. He confirmed that Timur had been tall, broad-shouldered, had a permanently lame right leg and arm consistent with battlefield wounds described in medieval chronicles, and had died at approximately 69 years of age. The facial reconstruction Gerasimov produced became the most recognized portrait of Tamerlane in modern historical scholarship. The science was real. The deaths associated with the opening were 0. No curse struck anyone in Samarkand in June 1941, and yet, the elders did not warn that the tomb would kill those who opened it. They warned that opening it would release a conqueror. They were describing an event external to the excavation. They were describing a consequence in geopolitics, not in the bodies of archaeologists. How does a medieval oral tradition encode a prediction about the relationship between an ancient tomb and modern international warfare? Was it pattern recognition across centuries of historical observation, a cultural memory of what upheaval tends to follow when Timur's legacy is disturbed? Or was the inscription placed inside the casket by someone who expected it to be found, expected the finder to be a rationalist who would dismiss it, and expected the consequences to arrive anyway? Why did Soviet officials document the elder warnings formally, before proceeding rather than simply ignoring them? Who placed the inscription inside the casket, and what did they know? And why, in a regime operating on pure materialist ideology, did Stalin himself order the bones returned? Number 2. The Curse of Tutankhamun. The year is 1922. You are crouched in the dust of the Valley of the Kings, watching Howard Carter press his face against a small opening he has just made in a sealed doorway that has not been disturbed in 3,230 years. A candle illuminates the chamber beyond. Lord Carnarvon, standing at Carter's shoulder, asks the question that will be repeated in every history of archaeology ever written. Can you see anything? Carter does not move for a long moment. Yes, he says finally. Wonderful things. What he saw was a room so densely packed with gold that it took 10 years to catalog fully. Gilded couches in the shapes of lions and hippopotamuses, alabaster jars, shrines stacked against shrines, 2 black sentinel statues flanking a sealed inner wall, and behind that wall, the nested golden coffins of a minor pharaoh who had died at 19, been buried in such haste that the gold in his innermost coffin was still tacky with unset resin when Carter found it 32 centuries later. Tutankhamun had ruled during one of ancient Egypt's most turbulent reigns, the generation after his father Akhenaten dismantled the entire religious order. He reversed his father's work, restored the old gods, and died before anyone understood why. The curse began before the tomb was even fully opened. Howard Carter's pet canary was killed by a cobra on the day the excavation team moved into the Valley of the Kings. Cobras, in ancient Egyptian iconography, were the symbol of the pharaoh's divine protection. Some accounts describe the bird being swallowed in its cage. The symbolism was noted. Carter dismissed it and continued. In February 1923, Carter and Carnarvon broke the inner seal. They entered the burial chamber and stood, for the first time in over 3 millennia, in the presence of the intact mummy of the boy king. Lord Carnarvon was dead by April 5th, 57 days later. A mosquito bite on his cheek became infected. Blood poisoning spread through a body already compromised by a severe motorcar accident years earlier that had left his lungs permanently damaged. He died in Cairo at the age of 57. Every light in the city of Cairo reportedly went out simultaneously at the moment of his death. His dog at Highclere Castle in England allegedly howled and died at the same hour. The mainstream explanation is that the curse of Tutankhamun is a myth, constructed partly by a journalist and partly by coincidence. It is straightforward. It fits nearly all the evidence. The most famous element of the whole story, the inscription reading, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king," was entirely fabricated. A journalist invented it. The actual inscriptions found in Tutankhamun's tomb contain no death curses. Cairo's lights went out routinely. The electrical grid was unreliable. The dog story is documented only in third-hand accounts written years after the fact. Lord Carnarvon had been in poor health for 2 decades. He was never a good candidate for surviving an infection in Egypt. The numbers confirm it. Herbert Winlock, curator of Egyptian art at the Metropolitan Museum of New York, conducted a statistical analysis of the deaths attributed to the curse. Of the 22 individuals present at the opening of the sarcophagus in 1924, only 6 had died within the following 10 years. Of the 26 present at the unwrapping of the mummy in 1925, 2 had died within a decade. Howard Carter himself, the man with more contact with the tomb than anyone alive, died in 1939, 17 years after the opening, at 64. The numbers do not support a pattern of unusual mortality, but the biological explanation that replaced the curse narrative is, in its own way, more interesting than the myth. Egyptian Egyptologist Ez el-Din Taha investigated sealed ancient tombs in 1962 and found measurable concentrations of Aspergillus niger and Aspergillus flavus fungal molds, capable of causing severe respiratory illness and, in individuals with weakened immune systems, fatal infections. A sealed royal tomb, undisturbed for 3,000 years, is not dead space. It is a sealed biological ecosystem. The organisms inside have been evolving in complete isolation from human immune systems since the day the door was shut. When the seal breaks, those organisms meet a world they have never encountered. Lord Carnarvon had compromised lungs. He was exactly the person for whom exposure to an ancient sealed environment would be most dangerous. The mosquito bite was coincidental. What was not coincidental was his presence, in poor respiratory health, in a chamber that had been accumulating biological material for 32 centuries. Which deaths in that excavation were fungal exposure? Which were ordinary mortality in an era before modern medicine? Who in that team knew they were breathing something no immune system had met before? And if sealed tombs are genuine biological hazards, why did Carter, who was healthier and spent more time inside the burial chamber than anyone, live another 17 years while the man who funded the excavation died within 2 months of the opening? Number 3. The tomb of Casimir IV Jagiellon. The year is 1973. You are in the Royal Archcathedral Basilica of Saints Stanislaus and Wenceslaus on Wawel Hill in Krakow, Poland, watching a team of 16 researchers prepare to open the sarcophagus of a medieval king. The cathedral has stood here since the 14th century. Every Polish monarch since Władysław I has been buried within its walls. The mission today is academic. Examine the physical remains of Casimir IV Jagiellon, King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania, who died in 1492, the same year Columbus reached the Americas. The tomb has not been opened, since it was sealed nearly 5 centuries ago. No one expects danger. The researchers open the sarcophagus. Within 12 months, 12 of the 16 investigators are dead. The deaths came quickly enough, and clustered specifically enough around the opening, that Polish medical researchers began an investigation. They found what they were looking for inside the sarcophagus itself: fungal colonies of exceptional virulence. Aspergillus flavus, Aspergillus niger, Penicillium, and several additional mold species were identified in high concentrations on the interior surfaces, the burial textiles, and the degraded wooden materials of the coffin. Aspergillus flavus produces aflatoxins. Aflatoxins are among the most potent naturally occurring carcinogens and immunosuppressants known to science. They are the same compounds responsible for the most dangerous food contamination events in modern agricultural history. Inside Casimir's sealed tomb, they had been accumulating and evolving for nearly 500 years without interruption. The mechanism is straightforward in retrospect. A sealed medieval royal burial contains exactly the conditions for long-term fungal development: organic materials from the body, burial garments, and wooden coffin components, stable temperature and humidity, complete isolation from external air currents, and an absence of the competing organisms that would normally limit fungal growth in open environments. The researchers who opened the sarcophagus inhaled spores from organisms that had been evolving in complete biological isolation since before the European colonization of the Americas. Their immune systems had no adaptive experience with these specific strains. Of the 4 who survived, most were younger and in demonstrably better health at the time of exposure. The correlation between pre-existing immune vulnerability and death was strong. This is the scientific explanation, and it is, in its specifics, entirely adequate. It explains the mortality pattern. It explains the timing weeks to months after exposure, not immediate collapse at the tomb's edge. It explains why the ratio was 12:16 rather than 16:16. Since 2005, multiple European archaeological organizations have established formal protocols requiring that sealed tombs be opened under controlled atmospheres with full respiratory protection. Casimir IV's tomb contributed directly to those protocols. But the explanation generates a secondary question that is considerably harder to dismiss. Medieval Polish embalmers and royal court officials who prepared the tomb in 1492 had no concept of fungal spores, aflatoxins, or airborne pathogen transmission. They did not intentionally engineer a biological hazard. The fungi arrived through natural processes, from the body, from the organic materials, from airborne spores trapped at sealing. This is not in question. What is worth considering is whether anyone observed, across the centuries, before germ theory, that people who opened ancient sealed tombs sometimes died afterward. In the absence of any understanding of airborne illness, such deaths would have been attributed with complete sincerity to divine punishment. The prohibition against disturbing royal burials would have been transmitted as religious and legal injunction. Priests would have warned against opening the tombs of kings not because they understood aflatoxin biology, but because they had observed, across enough instances, across enough generations, that tomb openers died. The warning and the biology were the same fact expressed in different languages. Medieval Europe's cathedral tombs may represent one of the longest-running examples of empirical public health knowledge in Western history, encoded and transmitted as supernatural prohibition because the tools to transmit it scientifically did not exist. The curse was the data was the curse. 12 of 16 is a specific number. Specific enough that a statistician would not dismiss it as noise. But specific questions remain. Were all 12 deaths directly caused by the fungal exposure, or did some fall within an age and health range where deaths in any given year would have clustered? Were the 4 survivors simply lucky, or were they protected by some factor that has not been fully documented? And what is sealed in the other royal tombs of Wawel Cathedral, undisturbed since the medieval period, in which the air has not been tested and the organic materials have had centuries more to develop? Number 4. The burial mound of Qin Shi Huang. The year is 1974. You are a farmer named Yang Zhifa, digging a well in a field outside Xi'an in Shaanxi Province, China. Your shovel strikes something that is not soil. You dig further. A ceramic arm emerges life-sized, then a torso. Then, as other workers are called over and the excavation widens, a face. You have found one soldier of an army of 8,000, positioned to guard a tomb that has not been opened in 2,200 years. The man buried beneath the nearby mound was Ying Zheng, the first emperor to unify China under a single rule. He became Qin Shi Huang. He took the throne of the Qin state at 13, in 247 BCE, and he spent the remaining 36 years of his reign trying, with total and well-documented seriousness, to become immortal. He failed, dying in 210 BCE at approximately 49, possibly killed by the mercury-laced immortality elixirs his own court physicians had prescribed. But the burial complex he commissioned, which employed 700,000 workers over nearly 4 decades, has outlasted every dynasty that came after him. The tomb itself has never been opened. The terracotta warriors, documented by lead archaeologist Yuan Zhongyi and his colleagues across excavation campaigns beginning in the 1970s, are the outer security perimeter, not the burial itself. 8,000 individual soldiers, no 2 faces identical, arranged in battle formation in 3 main pits. Infantry, cavalry, archers, chariot drivers, and officers ranked by grade, with bronze weapons so precisely cast that some blades remained sharp after 2,000 years underground. Extraordinary, but they are the guards. What they are guarding is buried beneath the mound that rises 51 meters above the plain, and the mound has not been excavated. The Chinese historian Sima Qian, writing approximately a century after the emperor's death in his Shiji, described the burial chamber's interior. According to Sima Qian, the chamber contains rivers of mercury kept in perpetual motion by a mechanical system, simulating the Yangtze and Yellow rivers. The ceiling is set with pearls and gems representing the constellations. The floor is a topographic model of the empire. Crossbow traps are positioned to fire at any intruder who enters without knowing their precise location. The emperor's concubines, who had not produced heirs, were buried alive within the sealed complex. The mainstream explanation treats Sima Qian's account as historical source, requiring physical verification, not literal truth. A historian writing 100 years after a sealed space was closed would naturally rely on court records, rumor, and retrospective embellishment. The terracotta army was once thought to be exaggeration. The crossbow traps were once considered legend. These elements, however, have now been confirmed through excavation of the outer pits, and 100 times normal. That is the mercury concentration directly above the burial chamber. A geochemical soil analysis, combined with LiDAR mapping published in the Journal of Archaeological Science in 2020, revealed a complex of underground rooms beneath the mound, consistent with Sima Qian's description, with a central chamber estimated at approximately 75 by 50 meters. The mercury levels in the soil above that chamber measure 100 times the normal background for the surrounding terrain. The rivers of mercury are real. They are still there. And they remain there because the tomb remains sealed. The Chinese government's official position, articulated by Shaanxi Archaeological Institute's Duan Qingbo, among others, is that current preservation technology is insufficient for excavation without destroying what is inside. Organic materials, textiles, lacquered wood, and biological remains preserved in a sealed environment for over 2,000 years would begin oxidizing within hours of atmospheric exposure. The mercury vapor hazard to an excavation team would be significant and measurable. These are genuine constraints. They are not pretexts. But the mound has been known since the Han dynasty. Every subsequent dynasty, Han, Tang, Song, Ming, had the organizational capacity and the labor force to excavate it. None of them did. The emperors who followed Qin Shi Huang had strong dynastic reasons to associate themselves with his legacy. Excavating his tomb would have been the most dramatic possible act of historical connection. The Han Dynasty texts that mention the mound include passages describing the complex as guarded by mechanisms no one could safely navigate. These were dismissed as embellishment. The crossbow traps were confirmed by excavation. The mercury rivers were confirmed by instruments. Sima Qian was describing something real. His account of the mercury is confirmed. His account of the traps is confirmed. What is the current scholarly assessment of the accuracy of the rest? What does a man who believed he was building his afterlife, a man who spent his life pursuing literal immortality, put inside a chamber he designed to never be entered? And if the answer to that question is currently sitting beneath 51 meters of compacted earth in a chamber flooded with liquid mercury, protected by crossbow mechanisms that have now been standing for 22 centuries, is there a version of this story where we eventually find out? Number 5. The Royal Death Pits of Ur. The year is 1927. You are Leonard Woolley, British archaeologist, and you have been excavating the ancient Sumerian city of Ur in what is now southern Iraq for 3 years. You have catalogued thousands of ordinary graves, recovered pottery and cylinder seals, grown accustomed to the particular silence of the deeply buried dead. Ancient graves do not surprise the experienced archaeologist. Then, the shaft opens into a chamber sealed since approximately 2500 BCE, 4,500 years ago, and you realize that the person buried here did not die alone. Around the central burial space, arranged in orderly rows, are the remains of 74 human beings, not scattered, not piled, positioned. Court attendants in their finest ceremonial dress, soldiers wearing gold and silver helmets, weapons arranged at their sides, musicians with instruments, grooms with oxen, harpers beside their harps, and in the hands of the attendants, small clay cups, the same shape, the same size, placed in exactly the same position in each pair of hands. The cups are empty. Woolley published his findings across 4 volumes of the Antiquaries' Journal between 1934 and 1935, and his description of the scene he uncovered is methodical and precise. He noted something that would prove more significant than any single artifact. There was no evidence of violence on any of the 74 bodies, no weapon trauma to the bones, no evidence of binding or restraint, no signs of the disordered positioning that mass killing leaves behind. The bodies were found exactly where they had sat or lain down. Whatever happened in this pit happened quietly. Oxford scholar P.R.S. Morey, who dedicated decades to the study of Mesopotamian funerary practice, documented the underlying belief system that made this possible. In Sumerian cosmology, death was not a departure from life, but a continuation of it in a parallel realm. The king did not stop being king when he died. He needed his court, his musicians, his household, his soldiers. If you were part of that household in life, belonging to it in death was not a punishment. It was an extension of the role you already held. The cups contained almost certainly a poison, something fast enough to prevent distress, slow enough to allow the attendants to take their places and sit down. The mainstream interpretation is voluntary ritual sacrifice conducted with genuine religious conviction. Those who entered the pit believed, within the complete sincerity of their cosmological framework, that they were accompanying their king into continued service. The organization of the scene, the care taken with dress and positioning, The placement of instruments, the orderly arrangement suggesting participants who had rehearsed this indicates ceremony, not chaos. Some comparative scholarship has noted superficial parallels with ritualized self-sacrifice traditions in other ancient cultures, though Woolley himself was careful to avoid overstating these connections. But voluntary sacrifice on this scale, conducted with this degree of organization, leaves questions that no amount of archaeological confidence fully resolves. The cups are the pivot. The cups in the hands of 74 people who died in neat rows are the detail that refuses to settle into any comfortable framework. Did every one of those 74 people know, when they lifted their cup, what it contained? Or were they told this was a ceremony, one they had participated in before in practice, from which they would walk out again? Was there a moment when some of them understood, and when understanding came, was it too late to move? Woolley documented one body found with its arm extended toward the tomb entrance, reaching in the direction of the sealed door. He noted the detail without conclusion. Final muscle relaxation can produce positions that look purposeful. It may mean nothing. It is the kind of detail that archaeology can record but cannot interpret. The golden lyre of now in the British Museum, was found in this pit. The royal standard of depicting scenes of feasting and war in shell and lapis lazuli, was found here. The most extraordinary treasures of Sumerian civilization lay in the same chamber as 74 people who died beside them. No similar death pits have been found at any other Mesopotamian site of the same period. This practice, if it was widespread, left no other physical record. Appears singular. Why? Was it specific to one dynasty, one cult, one era of Sumerian belief that did not survive the city? Was the practice abandoned because its practitioners died with their king, leaving no one to continue it? Or are there other sealed pits, in the unexcavated areas of southern Iraq's archaeological landscape, in which this scene is waiting to be found again? And the cups, those small, ordinary, empty clay cups, still in those hands after 4,500 years, did they know? Number 6. The tomb of Lady Dai. The year is 1971. You are part of a construction crew in Changsha, Hunan Province, China, drilling into the side of a low hill to build an underground air raid shelter during a period of heightened Cold War tension. At 6 meters depth, the drill punches through something unexpected. Not rock, not consolidated soil. Wood. Sealed wood, arranged in a way that suggests deliberate construction. The team digs carefully around the edges of the find. A shaft is revealed, leading downward into a burial chamber, sealed since approximately 168 BCE, 2,139 years ago. Before any archaeologist can reach the site, someone breaks the outer seal to investigate. There is an explosion. The volatile gases that had accumulated inside the airtight tomb over 2 millennia ignite the moment they contact the oxygen-rich air from the open shaft. The workers escape without casualties. Archaeologists from the Hunan Provincial Museum arrive and establish a controlled site. When a proper opening is finally made, the team encounters a sequence that takes days to work through. A layer of white clay, then a thick layer of charcoal, then a massive outer lacquered coffin. Inside the outer coffin, a second. Inside the second, a third. Inside the third, a fourth, all lacquered in elaborate decorative patterns. The innermost coffin is submerged in approximately 180 liters of a brownish liquid of still not fully characterized chemical composition. Inside the innermost coffin is a woman, not a skeleton, a body. Her skin still yields to pressure. Her limbs can still be manipulated at the joints. Blood vessels in her arm contain fluid that, when analyzed, proves to be type A blood. Her lungs, partially intact after 2,000 years, retain identifiable tissue. Wu Zhongbi, the lead pathologist who conducted the examination published by Chinese state archaeologists in 1973, documented the clinical findings with precision. Gallstones, arteriosclerosis, consistent with a sedentary high-fat diet, a compressed lumbar disc, early-stage tuberculosis, and, in her stomach, 162 melon seeds, the remains of the last meal she consumed, probably within hours of her death. She was approximately 50 years old. She died, most likely, of a heart attack. She is identified from the inscriptions on the grave goods as Xin Jui, the Marquise of Dai, wife of Chancellor Li Kang, who administered a regional territory under the first Han Emperor. The tomb was one of 3 burial sites at Mawangdui, a larger tomb for her husband, a smaller one for her son. The husband's tomb had been robbed in antiquity. The Marquise's tomb was perfectly sealed and, because of that seal, produced the best preserved human body from the ancient world. The mainstream explanation for the preservation is environmental and architectural. The charcoal layer absorbed moisture and gases. The white clay formed an impermeable barrier against groundwater infiltration. The lacquered coffins restricted air exchange at each layer. The liquid in the innermost coffin may have contributed chemical stability, though its exact composition remains incompletely resolved. It is logical. It fits the physical evidence precisely. Each element of the burial system has a plausible mechanical explanation, but each mechanical explanation requires a prior piece of knowledge. To use charcoal and clay in that precise layering sequence, to construct 4 nested coffins at that specific spacing, to seal the innermost chamber in liquid, all of this required empirical knowledge that the system worked. The Han Dynasty mortuary specialists who built this tomb had no instruments to verify the outcome. They sealed it and could not look inside. Whatever knowledge produced this burial came from observation, from someone, at some earlier point in the transmission of burial knowledge, who had opened an older sealed tomb and found preservation, and then encoded what they observed. The Marquise of Dai's tomb may be the product of a tradition that began when someone else opened a door they probably should not have. The body remains in the Hunan Museum in Changsha, where it has been studied continuously for over 50 years and is considered one of the most medically significant archaeological finds in history. The melon seeds in her stomach are the most specific detail, a personal, ordinary, human fact suspended perfectly in the moment of a woman eating a meal 2,000 years ago, unaware she was eating her last one. The gas explosion at the first breach of that tomb is not an incidental detail. 2,000 years of sealed organic chemistry, compressed into a confined space, reactive enough to ignite on contact with open air. That gas had been accumulating since the reign of the first Han emperor. And there are, by the most conservative Chinese archaeological estimate, tens of thousands of Han Dynasty tombs that have never been opened, each one, its own sealed system, its own chemistry, its own 2,000 years of building pressure. What is in them? And what happens when someone eventually drills through the wrong one? Number 7. The Tomb of Kasta Hill. The year is 2012. You are in northern Greece, in the region of Macedonia, 40 kilometers east of Thessaloniki. A hill called Kasta rises from the agricultural plain east of the ancient city of Amphipolis. It is 350 meters in circumference, 23 meters high, surrounded by a marble perimeter wall of a quality and scale that drew the attention of every Greek archaeologist who ever visited the site. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed structures inside the mound. The Greek Ministry of Culture assigns the excavation to Katerina Peristeri of the Central Macedonia Ephrate of Antiquities. What follows over the next 2 years will be watched by the entire Greek nation, broadcast by state television, with the kind of breathless continuity normally reserved for elections, and end in an anticlimax that reveals more about the limits of history than any positive identification ever could. The excavation proceeds in layers, each more extraordinary than the last. The marble perimeter wall is uncovered first, finely jointed limestone work consistent only with royal patronage, then a marble-paved entrance corridor. Then the threshold, guarded by 2 sphinxes female, winged, carved in a scale larger than any sphinx sculptures found anywhere else in Greece, their faces damaged by ancient or medieval hands, but their bodies largely intact. Then a second chamber threshold, guarded by 2 caryatids, female figures carved as architectural columns, their faces rendered with a psychological subtlety that leaves visiting art historians describing them in language normally reserved for Athenian masterworks. Then, across the chamber floor, a pebble mosaic covering approximately 4.5 meters by 3 meters. A chariot, driven by Hermes, in pursuit of Persephone, rendered in 24 hues of colored stone, with a compositional precision appearing in no other known context in Greek archaeology. The construction date, established through ceramic analysis and architectural stylistic assessment, fell between approximately 325 and 300 BCE, within a decade of the death of Alexander the Great in Babylon in 323 BCE. The decorative quality exceeded anything found outside the most prestigious known royal contexts of ancient Macedonia. Greek Prime Minister Antonis Samaras visited the site personally in the summer of 2014. A poll conducted during the excavation found that 63% of Greeks believed the tomb belonged to Alexander himself. Tourism to the Amphipolis region increased measurably, while the interior was still sealed. The mainstream conclusion, held by Peristeri throughout and consistent with the physical evidence, was always that Alexander's tomb could not be here. His body was taken to Egypt by the general Ptolemy shortly after the king's death in Babylon and interred in Alexandria, where it was visited and described by multiple Roman sources before disappearing from the historical record in late antiquity. Archaeologists with public platforms said so throughout the excavation. The national conversation proceeded as if they had not. Peristeri and her team reached the sealed inner chambers in late 2014. They found skeletons, multiple individuals across several chambers, bone fragments from at least 5 people, a woman of approximately 60 years of age whose bones showed signs of significant physical stress, an older man, 2 men of fighting age, an infant in a lead casket. No single burial dominated the chamber in the way a primary royal interment would have. No gold larnacs, no cremated remains. Multiple bodies distributed across spaces designed to hold them, but not organized around any one of them. It was not Alexander. Peristeri's archaeological reports through 2015 proposed a connection to the circle of Cassander, the Macedonian general who seized power after Alexander's family was exterminated following the king's death. The construction scale and quality were consistent with a royal commission from the late 4th century BCE. The identity of the primary occupant remains formally unresolved. The political dimensions of this are not separable from the archaeological ones. The ongoing dispute between Greece and the Republic of North Macedonia over the cultural heritage of the ancient Macedonian kingdom means that every identified artifact from Macedonian royal contexts carries a significance that extends past scholarship. The sphinxes and caryatids of Kasta Hill have been enrolled in a geopolitical argument about which modern nation inherits an ancient identity. What exactly did Cassander, or whoever commissioned this tomb, intend to communicate with this scale of construction? Why does a tomb built for royalty contain multiple individuals without a dominant primary burial? And somewhere beneath the streets and archaeology of modern Alexandria, beneath layers of Ptolemaic, Roman, Byzantine, and Arab construction that may never be disturbed, is the one tomb whose opening would have made Kasta's anticlimax impossible? Number 8. The Tomb of Pakal the Great. The year is 1948. You are Alberto Ruz Luhilier, Mexican archaeologist and director of excavations at the ruined Maya city of Palenque in the tropical forest of what is now Chiapas. The Temple of the Inscriptions has been known to Western scholarship since Spanish colonial records documented it in the 17th century. It has been studied, photographed, and described by archaeologists for over a century. But Ruz has noticed something every previous visitor missed. The floor of the top chamber is made of large stone slabs, and one of them has a row of small holes drilled along its edge. The holes are plugged with stone stoppers. They look like handles. Ruz has the slab lifted. Beneath it, a stairway, descending, filled completely with rubble, limestone debris, packed and sealed so thoroughly that removing it requires 4 full excavation seasons, 1 step at a time, 69 steps down into the body of the pyramid. The stairway goes down, not up. Everything archaeologists had assumed about the function of Maya temple pyramids was organized around the assumption that the pyramid was a platform for the temple at its top. This pyramid contained a tomb at its base. 4 years of debris removal later, Ruz reaches the bottom. The passage to the burial chamber is sealed by triangular limestone slabs, their joints hardened with a cement-like mixture that had set over 13 centuries. Inside the antechamber, the skeletal remains of 6 individuals, 5 young men and 1 young woman, arranged as guardians. A second sealed door. Behind it, a burial chamber 12 meters long and 7 meters high, its walls covered in stucco relief portraits of the 9 lords of the Maya underworld, figures in elaborate costume who watch the room from their fixed positions on the plastered stone. And in the center of the chamber, a stone sarcophagus of approximately 5 metric tons, covered by a single carved limestone lid weighing approximately the same, its surface carved in relief so complex that it took years of scholarly study to fully describe. Roos's interpretation of the sarcophagus lid, published in 1952 and refined across subsequent decades of scholarship, was grounded in detailed knowledge of Maya iconographic tradition. The central figure is a man in a reclined position at an angle, his body oriented at the hinge between life and the underworld, surrounded by a world tree rising from an offering bowl in the shape of a skeletal deity representing death. Serpents flank the composition, the sun and death symbols frame the border. This is Pakal, the great king who ruled Palenque for 68 years, from approximately 615 to 683 CE, depicted at the moment of his descent into Xibalba, the Maya underworld in the posture of voluntary sacrifice and rebirth. Every iconographic element on the lid appears in Maya codices and stelae across dozens of other sites with documented, consistent meanings. Within Mesoamerican scholarship, the interpretation is not contested. Eric von Daniken's 1968 book, Chariots of the Gods, offered a different reading. The reclined figure, von Daniken argued, was seated at the controls of a vehicle. The element rising at the figure's back was an exhaust nozzle. The posture was that of an astronaut during launch. Von Daniken's interpretation is rejected without exception by every scholar with training in Maya, iconography, and epigraphy. The visual language of the lid is not ambiguous within the tradition. It is one of the most explicitly coded Maya cosmological compositions ever found. But the reason von Daniken's interpretation found an audience worth millions of books is worth taking seriously not as evidence for ancient astronauts, but as evidence of something else. The lid is genuinely extraordinary. The level of artistic and engineering precision it represents was achieved without metal tools, without the wheel, in a forest environment that consumed the civilization that built it within 2 centuries of Pakal's death. The classic Maya collapse after 900 CE was so complete that by the time Spanish conquistadors and later colonial scholars reached Palenque, the forest had been growing through the temple walls for 600 years. Pakal's descendants had no preserved knowledge of who he was or what the site had been. The lid sat sealed for 1,269 years. What Roos found was not just a tomb, it was a sealed record of a civilization that encoded its complete understanding of death, cosmology, and kingship into 5 metric tons of carved stone, and was then forgotten so thoroughly that the encoded knowledge sat unread for over a millennium. The 9 lords of the underworld still watch from the stucco walls. In how many other unexcavated Maya temple pyramids is there a stairway descending from a floor no one has yet examined? And what was placed at the bottom of each of them? Number 9. The empty tomb of Hetepheres. The year is 1925. You are a photographer on the Harvard University and Boston Museum of Fine Arts expedition to Giza, setting up a camera tripod on the eastern face of the Great Pyramid to document the surrounding mastaba field. The leg of the tripod slips into a crack in the bedrock. You crouch to inspect it. The crack is not a natural fissure. It is the edge of a stone seal, and beneath it there is a vertical shaft cut straight down through solid rock. You call the expedition director, George Reisner, who examines the crack, straightens up, and gives the order for careful excavation. The shaft descends 27 meters. It was cut approximately 4,500 years ago, during the reign of Khufu, the pharaoh who built the Great Pyramid, standing 30 meters to the west. The seal has held for all of those years. The shaft was not known to any archaeologist before this moment. It was not listed in any ancient Egyptian text that had survived. It was found because a tripod leg slipped. What emerges from the shaft over the following weeks is staggering. Gold-sheathed carrying chair components. A canopied bed frame with golden panels. An alabaster chest containing silver bracelets inlaid with turquoise, carnelian, and lapis lazuli. Canopic jars of alabaster containing preserved visceral packages. Alabaster vessels. Furniture components of a quality and completeness exceeding almost any old kingdom found before or since. The cartouche inscriptions on the objects identify the owner without ambiguity. Hetepheres I, great royal wife of Pharaoh Sneferu, mother of Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid. This is the most important woman in Old Kingdom Egypt who could be buried here, the mother of the man who built the largest stone structure in human history. Her grave goods are the finest surviving collection of 4th Dynasty royal furniture in existence, Every object is in position. The canopic jars are sealed. The alabaster sarcophagus resting at the base of the shaft is perfectly sealed, showing no evidence of any disturbance since it was placed there in the 26th century BCE. Reisner's team documented everything with meticulous photographic and written records before touching the sarcophagus. The process required weeks. Everything they found confirmed a royal burial of the highest order, perfectly intact, sealed against robbery or interference for 4,500 years. When the documentation was complete and the excavation was ready, they opened the sarcophagus. It was empty. No body, no linen wrappings. No residue suggesting a body that had liquefied or fully desiccated over millennia. The alabaster interior was clean. Hetepheres I was not there. George Reisner devoted significant intellectual effort to explaining this. His explanation, published posthumously in 1955 by Dowes Dunham and William Kelly Simpson, based on Reisner's notes, proposed the following reconstruction. Hetepheres had originally been buried at Dashur, near the pyramid of her husband Sneferu. At some point during the reign of her son Khufu, the tomb was robbed. The robbers took the body either during the robbery or as the robbery's specific purpose, perhaps to extract the jewelry and amulets wrapped in the burial linen. When Khufu's officials discovered the robbery, they faced a crisis with no good solution. To acknowledge the desecration of the Queen Mother's tomb publicly would be a theological and political disaster. Her ghost, according to Old Kingdom belief, required her physical body to function in the afterlife. Her organs, in the canopic jars, had escaped the robbery. Her grave goods were intact. Khufu ordered everything transferred to a new, concealed shaft at Giza, sealed with precision and never publicly mentioned. The empty sarcophagus was a cover-up that held for 4,500 years. This is a carefully constructed explanation by a serious scholar. It accounts for every piece of physical evidence except the most important piece of physical evidence. But it requires assuming a concealment executed with perfect operational security, involving a significant portion of the Old Kingdom royal court that left no trace in any contemporaneous inscription, papyrus, or later historical account of any kind. The Old Kingdom was the most administratively documented period in early Egyptian history. The records that survive include grain accounts, quarry expeditions, and labor rosters. Royal tomb robbery was treated with the most severe legal consequences available. The cover-up Reisner proposed would have been the most consequential secret in the history of the Egyptian state, held by hundreds of officials for the entirety of Khufu's reign. Alternative readings have been proposed, that the shaft was always intended as a decoy burial and the real tomb of Hetepheres remains somewhere unlocated. That the body was deliberately removed to a hidden location for reasons of ritual protection so sensitive they could not be recorded. That something happened to the queen's body in the original burial process that Khufu's court would not and could not explain. The canopic jars with her internal organs are in the collection of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Her name is on every object in the shaft. She is nowhere. Number 10. The Royal Tomb of Vergina. The year is 1977. You are Manolis Andronikos, professor of archaeology at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, and you are running out of time. You have been excavating the great tumulus at Vergina in northern Greece for years, working methodically through a massive earthen mound that local farmers have plowed around for centuries without knowing what lay beneath it. The previous seasons have produced important but not transformative results. The university's patience and the available funding are finite. This is your last planned excavation season. In November, your team begins opening a cluster of tomb structures discovered in the mound's interior. The first two are clearly from the Hellenistic period and have been robbed in antiquity. On November 8, 1977, you open the third. It has not been touched. The antechamber contains the cremated bones of a young woman, arranged inside a golden chest, a larnax decorated on its lid with a 16-pointed star, the emblem of the Macedonian royal dynasty. The bones have been ritually cleaned, wrapped in a cloth of purple fabric, placed inside the gold container with evident deliberateness and ceremony. The main chamber holds a second larnax, larger than the first, decorated with the same Macedonian star. Inside it, the cremated remains of a man, wrapped in a purple and gold cloth of such extraordinary fineness that it partially dissolved on contact with the air the moment Andronikos opened the chest. Iron and bronze weapons of exceptional craftsmanship. gold greaves shin guards, one of which shows an asymmetric modification consistent with fitting a leg that had sustained a healed injury, an iron cuirass, and among the ivory decorations of a ceremonial couch, small portrait heads, each no larger than a thumb, carved with individual features. One of them depicts a man with a closed or damaged right eye. Andronikos's identification, published in the American Journal of Archaeology in 1978 and elaborated in his monograph Vergina, The Royal Tombs, in 1984, was built from the convergence of physical, archaeological, and historical evidence. The male remains, analyzed by a team including Jonathan Musgrave and Richard Neve, indicated a man of approximately 45 years at death, a healed wound to the lower leg consistent with a permanent limp, and evidence of significant traumatic injury to the right orbital area of the skull. Ancient sources are specific. Philip II of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, was permanently blinded in his right eye by an arrow at the siege of Methone in 354 BCE. He died in 336 BCE at approximately 46 years of age. He is known from multiple sources to have walked with a limp from a spear wound sustained in a separate campaign. The woman in the antechamber was identified as potentially Cleopatra, Philip's final wife, murdered shortly after his assassination. The match was not one correlation. It was several independent correlations converging on the same identification. In 2000, Antonis Bartsiokas published a re-examination of the skull's bone fusion patterns in Science, arguing they were inconsistent with a man of Philip's age and suggested a younger individual. In 2010, Nicholas Sotirakis published supporting analysis in the Journal of the Royal Society Interface. In 2015, Leon Lemos proposed a revised framework that the remains in Tomb 2, the large unlooted tomb, may belong to Philip III Aridaeus, Alexander's half-brother, who died at approximately 35, while the remains in the smaller adjacent Tomb 3 may actually be Philip II. The scholarly debate has not been closed. The political dimension of the dispute is not separable from the archaeological one. The ongoing conflict between Greece and the Republic of North Macedonia over the name, symbols, and cultural heritage of the ancient Macedonian kingdom means that the identification of a tomb as belonging to Philip II is not only a scholarly conclusion, it is a territorial claim in a dispute about which modern nation inherits the identity of antiquity's most celebrated dynasty. The bones in the Larnax have been enrolled in an argument their original occupants could not have imagined. Andronikos died in 1992, certain of his identification. The Larnax sits in the Museum of the Royal Tombs of Aigai at Vergina, the Macedonian star on its gold lid visible to every visitor. The fabric that dissolved when it met air after 23 centuries is gone. Whatever royal authority it carried went with it. From Samarkand to Giza, from Palenque to the plains of Mesopotamia, the pattern across these 10 tombs is the same. Sealed chambers do not only contain the dead, they contain everything the living were not ready to confront: curses that turned out to be biology that turned out to encode the oldest public health knowledge in Europe, wars of succession frozen in gold and dissolved fabric, bodies preserved past any reasonable expectation, and in one case, an entire civilization's queen who was simply never there. You are watching this because you are the kind of person who looks at an empty sarcophagus and does not accept that the story ends there. Most people close the lid. You kept watching. If this held your attention, subscribe. We go this deep every week. Leave a comment with the sealed tomb you think we missed, and let us know where in the world you are watching from.